All right, I think I'll do this in English. Yes. So my name is Sylvia Schwagserger. I'm the president of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences, and it's really my pleasure to welcome you to this seminar on the OECD Science, Technology and Innovation Outlook 2025. And there are several reasons why I'm very happy that we can host this seminar. I think that the OECD STI outlooks that are published every 2 years are a very valuable temperature gauge of what are really relevant issues in science, technology, and innovation policy. So I would really highly recommend, for those of you who haven't looked at it, to at least look at the executive summaries, because they really give you a feel for what are the big discussions in OECD member states on science, technology, and innovation. I also really like the one that you presented or published, I think, in December or in late 2025, because I also think it, again, summarizes some of the key issues that we're dealing with, some of us who have been working with science, technology, and innovation policy for a long time. I'm also very happy to welcome Michael. I think Joachim, you will introduce him, but I've known Michael for a long time. I've had the privilege of working with the OECD on some of the innovation reviews, which has been an extremely enlightening experience. And last but not least, I think it's in times of like these that we need organizations like the OECD more than ever. Contrary to what some others might argue, international organizations, and especially the ones that help us make sense of what is happening in things like technology development and scientific development, I think are essential if we're going to be able to navigate the future that we're facing. So with that, again, warmly welcome, and I'm looking forward to a good discussion.
So thanks, Sylvia, and once again, warmly welcome to this seminar at the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. As Sylvia mentioned, I think we're standing at many crossroads right now, and the established truths are being contested, and I think one such area is really research and innovation policy, which will be the topic of today. So we're really happy, as you said, really to host the OECD and be able to have the Swedish presentation of the STI Outlook here at Vinnova once again. We had it 2 years ago. Eva? You said no. Yeah, sorry. It feels like I'm among friends. A lot of you have known me when I was working for Vinnova for 15 years. So that will happen again, so I promise you. But thanks Sylvia, for reminding me. And we are very happy not just to have the presentation done by Michael, but also to have key stakeholders present to have a discussion on the conclusions and recommendation, and also to have representatives from almost all political parties in the Swedish Parliament, to also have a panel discussion on the conclusions and what is needed to move forward Sweden forward as a technology and innovation nation. We're really looking forward to that. I would also like to welcome everybody that is following this seminar online. There are a number of you, and we'll also record this seminar. And before letting Michael speak and present the results, I will just mention that this seminar is part of Swedish Futures, which is a vision project done by us at EVA, where we will draft a vision for Sweden as a technology and innovation nation in the world by 2035. And there will be a number of these seminars in the following years. So you will be welcome here again. With that, I would just like to introduce our guest of honor and keynote speaker, Michael Keenan, Senior Analyst at the OECD in the Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation. So the floor is yours, Michael. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Joachim, for the introduction, and to Sylvia as well. I think I press this, do I? And yes, okay. So I actually have been here before, but I haven't been down in the basement here before. I was here about 25 years ago talking about foresight at that time when I was an academic at the University of Manchester. And I was talking about the UK experience of foresight, but also European foresight more generally. And at that time, also Sweden was in the vanguard, in fact, in a lot of foresight work. So I also came to listen to hear what Sweden was doing. And that's the same story again today, 25 years later. I'm very much in listening mode here as well, to hear what are the important issues for you, what I need to bring back to Paris, if you like, for us also to research over the next few years. But I will begin with a sort of one-way monologue here. I will make a presentation of the outlook, the STI outlook, which was published late last year. As Sylvia mentioned, this comes out every 2 years. It's really a flagship publication of the OECD in this area of science, technology, innovation policy. And it asks what's new in the field. So as Sylvia mentioned, it sort of takes a temperature. Some people think, though, because it's called an outlook, it's some sort of like future-oriented report, which it isn't really. It's mostly has a rather shorter time horizon of maybe 3 years, something along those lines. We have on occasion looked a bit further out. So the 2016 edition, for example, did a lot of work on megatrends and technology trends. And we are thinking in the next edition in 2027, we may bring some of that work in again and do something a bit more future-oriented than what we've been doing in recent editions. But it does provide an international review, of course, with it being the OECD, so it's packed with case examples, as well as lots of indicators as well that are comparing the performance of different countries on a range of different issues. And it draws on a range of contributions. So I am the editor of this book. I wrote the first 2 chapters, but it's 7 chapters, and I didn't write the other 5, 2 of which I'm presenting today. So I'll hopefully you won't ask too tough questions on those 2 chapters. But it's really a collection of work that provides a window into the breadth of work that we're doing on STI policy within the OECD. So the different working parties of that committee of scientific and technological policy, working parties that are focusing on statistics, on technology innovation policy, on nano conversion technologies, on science system reforms. They're all contributing to this chapter as well. And we also, in this edition, have a chapter from the Committee on Industry, Innovation, on Entrepreneurship. And that chapter is about industrial policy. So I'll say a few words about that in a moment as well when I give an overview. So I won't dwell too long on this slide. I think it's quite well known amongst those here in the room that there are some really big drivers of change that are raising challenges for the STI systems, but also for STI policy. But they also offer opportunities. So there are, of course, various global challenges and that we need to address, but we need to address them in a time of fiscal constraints. So this, of course, offers us very difficult challenges. There's also rising geoeconomic tensions and economic security concerns, which have really come to the fore in the last 3-4 years. We have inequality in opportunities and rising social fragmentation, both within our societies, but also across the world. And finally, coming from our field very much, are, of course, disruptive emerging and converging technologies as well, which are affecting our economies and societies. So these are sort of the key drivers of change that underpin all of the chapters. And then from those, we have a few headline messages. So the first headline message is around the need to address more ambitious and transformative goals. But doing this, of course, in a time of fiscal constraints means that we need to be more efficient in the way that we do policy, in the way we implement policy. And I'll say a few words about that in a moment. We also need to retain the benefits of international STI linkages, while, of course, securing our systems at the same time. And, of course, there's something of a balancing act to achieve there. We need to enact structural reforms that promote high-risk, high-reward STI, and I'll come back to that a bit later in the presentation as well. And that high-risk, high-reward STI is often interdisciplinary, of course. We also need to keep an eye on technology convergence, which is often a major driver of technological change, and of course also the diffusion of technology. And finally, if we're going to do all of those things, if we're going to do them well, we need a good evidence base. We need good knowledge. We need perhaps to renew our policy frameworks and approaches as well. So that's really a final headline message here that runs across most of the chapters as well. So those are the chapters there. Very briefly, they're covering, as I say, a wide breadth of issues. So the first chapter and the fourth and the seventh, I will get into a bit more details, but let me maybe say a bit about the ones I won't be covering. So the second one is on reconfiguring scientific cooperation in a changing geopolitical environment. So this one is really talking about research security, economic security, and it presents a model, or a framework perhaps, rather than a model, for countries and governments to think about how they might govern this security turn within their STI policies. Then we have a chapter here, chapter 3, which is really about inclusion, looking mostly at different population groups, but also different regions, different industries within countries, and makes various proposals for expanding the benefits of STI investments so that they do diffuse to those other groups and to those other places. Then the chapter 5 is on technology convergence, and here we look at several different technologies, including neurotechnology, synbio, AI, quantum technologies, and we look at their convergence trends, and what the prospects are around those. So this is a little bit more future-oriented than some of the other chapters, but also some of the policies that can promote that convergence and also can leverage the benefits of that convergence. And then finally, here, the one I'm not covering is this industrial policy chapter, very interesting. It offers what they call an ecosystems approach to industrial policy. As you know, a lot of industrial policy is sort of sectoral, or it's very horizontal. This one here offers, really looks at the full value chain. It looks at the different actors around industrial policy, and also has very strong messages on the need for strong evidence bases and strategic intelligence as well. So let me just round off that introduction by saying that really where the book lands, if you like, is the argument that if STI policy is to remain fit for purpose, there need to be some serious structural reforms implemented. And that these reforms, in turn, should strengthen national innovation systems, helping them to drive change that responds to the shifting landscape and tackles future challenges. So now I'm going to go a little bit deep into 3 chapters, as I showed in the previous slide. So chapter 1 on mobilizing STI policies for transformative change. So I'm going to start with a few indicators, as I come from the OECD. And this chapter is a chapeau chapter. So it not only talks about efficiencies and the like, but also has some headline indicators on how governments are performing, how much they spend, and so on. And this graph here shows, if you look at the diamonds, this is probably the best place to start. It shows that, and then look and compare to the bars, you can see that expenditures, the diamonds are 2013 and the bars are 2023. You can see in most countries there's actually been an increase in R&D intensity. So this is a good news story for our field. It's also the case in Sweden, which is also one of the major investors in R&D among OECD countries. But what we have seen, if we look more closely at the data, is that this growth rate has really tailed off in the last few years, and it doesn't look hopeful from initial signs for 2024, for example. You'll all be aware of developments in the United States as well, where there are declines in funding, at least from the public sector. So this probably will feed through here as well, given the dominance of the US system in OECD countries. Another thing to point out is that a lot of this growth is actually been driven by firms. So it goes back to 2007, looks over the last 15 years. You can see that even adjusting for inflation here, that the growth in firm expenditures on R&D has almost doubled. It's really quite impressive. But you see that for universities and for public research institutes, the increases have been much less. And what this translates into is, if you look at the who was actually doing R&D, say in 2010, around 2/3 of it was being performed in the business sector, but today it's around 3/4. So that's an important message to take home, because we often talk about the public research system, we talk about public policy. A lot of it's directed again towards the public research system, of course, also trying to get firms to do more R&D and innovate as well. But the firms are really a huge block of activities here on which we don't always have a huge amount of influence, at least not in STI policy. And then if we turn to government budget allocations for R&D, this is another interesting slide, because it shows that these continue to go up over the last decade or so on a rather gentle slope, which is good news. But you can see in the last few years, this has stagnated. And again, the data for 2025, I think this is going to drop quite a bit further. But what's interesting here is a little circle at the top there, because what we've done here is we've segmented this data according to different areas in which governments are actually directing their R&D spending. And those two lines there at the top are energy and defense. So governments are spending a lot on those and really increasing expenditures there. In some of the other areas, though, less so. So if we look at, I think, health, for example, after the COVID crisis has of course dropped off now as well. So we have a situation where government is spending probably less, but is certainly not going to be spending more. Also, a lot of this expenditure is increasingly being directed to a few core areas, and energy and defense. And we know with all of the securitization of STI, defense is in all countries is becoming much more prominent as well as an area. Given all of those things, the outlook argues that we need greater efficiencies within the system if we're going to tackle some of these really big challenges that relate to these transformative goals that we're aiming for. And these include leveraging policy priority. Leveraging synergies between different policy priorities, so between security and sustainability transitions and so on and so forth. This is an area I know that Sylvia has done some work. Also rebalancing direct and indirect R&D support. So some countries are very heavily dependent on R&D tax incentives, for example. This is a development that's happened over the last 20 years or so. R&D tax incentives are great for many things, but they're not so good for directing your system towards more ambitious goals. So some countries, there needs to be a rebalancing. Strengthening coordination between different policy parts of the system, very important. I'll come back to that in a minute. Also leveraging public finance in order to attract private funds, leveraging public finance to attract private finance through things like blended finance instruments, particularly around transformative goals such as sustainability transitions. And finally, the importance of policy fostering fundamental transformative change. And I'll come back to this in a moment. A lot of the funding, a lot of the policies are more incremental. And the argument we're making here is that they need to embrace things like various types of nonlinear dynamics, tipping points, cascade effects, returns to scale, all of these rather nonlinear dynamics which are often missing in a lot of policy planning. So I'm going to have a little bit of a deep dive on just these two. On the first, on the policy priorities. So I'm not going to read this, so don't worry. But what we have done is we've tabulated across different priority areas. So here, this is a tabulation that looks at the synergies and the trade-offs between pursuing sustainability transitions on the one hand and some more competitiveness goals on the others. I mean, you can read the tables. There are no big surprises there, but it's useful to have those things mapped out. And what's even more useful is to try and see how governments are addressing those that are trying to leverage the synergies, but also manage the trade-offs. So what the Outlook chapter does, it gives various different examples of what governments are doing here in order to manage those synergies and trade-offs, to navigate them, if you like. And we have, as I say, we have tables that are mapping against different sorts of objectives. Turning to the need for coordination. So another argument we make is that governments need to better wire up their policy portfolios. We maintain at the OECD a database called the STIP Compass, which has information on around 9,000 STI policies from around 60 countries. On average, a European country has around 150 policies collected in this database. So there's a lot of, and these are just STI policies. And we're not even going very downstream either to the more diffusion and deployment stuff. It's kind of upstream as well. So there's a lot of policies there from many different agencies and ministries. These policies are covering different parts of the innovation chain, so that's the horizontal there, and some of them are directed and some are non-directed. And what we've done here is just basically map them. And as you'll well know, there's a lot of these are actually designed and implemented in silos. So there's a lot of interest, as has been historically, in trying to break down those silos. Some of the more traditional approaches have used things like national visions or strategies or set up committees. But I think these have had somewhat mixed success over the years. And so governments are now innovating. They're experimenting with different approaches, so ecosystem approaches that make linkages visible, or even getting those ecosystems themselves to at least partly govern with the policy mix and how much money is given to different parts of the system. Missions as well, as you know, have become very popular over the last 7 or 8 years. And I think we see there's a bit of a downturn on those now, but I think they'll ride that through, and they'll come out the other side as well, and they'll probably be better for that. Challenge-based funding, of course, is an area where Vinnova has done a lot of work historically as well. Joint calls and central funds, another approach. Merging funding bodies, some countries as well, and regulatory sandboxes where you can mix a lot of different things together. So there are quite a few examples from Sweden in this chapter, in fact, and I think many people consider Sweden to be in the vanguard. I know that when I speak to Swedes, they don't feel that way, and I think the issue more in Sweden is that there's a lot of really interesting things going on, but they're not scaled across the whole system, and I think that's probably where a lot of the frustration lies. But believe me, in many other countries, they're nowhere near where Sweden is. So. Okay, moving to chapter 4. So this is about how science systems need to adapt to support transformative change. So I didn't write this chapter. It's written by my colleague Carthage Smith, who's in charge of the Global Science Forum. So basically what he tried to do with this chapter was take what we call the transformative agenda, which was a document we released 2 years ago at a ministerial meeting, which argued for the need for quite radical transformative changes in the STI system itself, if it's going to contribute to broader socio-technical transitions, for example, around sustainability transitions. And so the starting point here, of course, is that we need to say about science, it's a big success story in many ways. It generates lots of new knowledge, lots of nice spillovers as well to society, and the benefits have been enormous. However, there is growing evidence, and lots of studies are out there today that say that science has become risk-averse. And this is driven by short-term incentives, which themselves are driven by more precarious working conditions, particularly for young scientists, or early career scientists, I should say. And so what this means is that a lot of research that happens is more incremental research in established fields, and there's a sort of lack of appetite to address these big questions for science and societies. But at the same time, if we want to tackle sustainability transitions, we know this is very urgent. And what's happening is essentially the system, this incremental system, isn't fit for purpose. It's not able to move at the necessary scale and speed to meet these urgent demands that are put on it. So this was this agenda I just mentioned in the previous slide that came out in April 2024 and has been one of the main drivers behind this edition of the STI Outlook. And basically this agenda calls for transformative change but transformative change, that's also within the innovation and science system and also within STI policy itself. And so it highlights that this moment, if you like, offers an opportunity to address what are considered rather persistent problems that have accumulated in science systems. So I just mentioned precarity, for example, which has been a persistent problem at least for about 25 years. It's certainly not a new problem. Many countries have introduced initiatives. We can see that in the last 5 years in particular to support high-risk, high-return research. But going back to what I said a moment ago about Sweden, there's lots of kind of very nice, interesting niche things going on there, but they account for very small proportions typically of the funding system, which is still dominated by these more traditional and classical incentive and reward systems, particularly those found in academia. So the argument here is that more serious and structural reforms are needed, really, if we're going to turn things around. And we're going to address both those persistent problems, but also address these bigger needs for transitions. So this chapter, again, I won't go through this slide, don't worry. It offers four leverage points around which policymakers might try to steer their STI system. So these are the research workforce, research infrastructures, science and society, and research assessment. And I'm just going to give an example from 3 of these very quickly as well. So one of the recommendations is the need to address the underlying structural issues that underpin research precarity and discourage high-risk, high-return research. It's a very big, recommendation with lots of things in there, of course. And if you look more closely there, of course, it's all about the incentives. So there's a little map here, which I won't get into the details, but showing that the incentives they just drive the system towards this sort of more risk-averse research, because of things like the pressure to publish. So better to avoid high-risk research topics with uncertain outcomes, for example. And there's wide recognition that precarity, there's no silver bullet to fix this. I mean, it's a complex problem. Some of the factors that are shaping that are mentioned here in the slide. But what is clear is if we want to try and fix this problem, it requires a systemic approach. And I mentioned a moment ago, government is still rather organized in silos in many countries, so it's quite difficult to enact that systemic approach. But it's an approach that will be needed to bring all of these actors together. Now, there's a lot of things going on in this area, as you'll know, internationally, so not only nationally, so lots and lots of initiatives. There was, I think, a large event in Copenhagen, I think, on this as well, back in November, early December, I think. So it's a really big topic at the moment. Looking at science and society leverage points, we have lots of things on this around things like scientific advice structures, but also around communication of science and societal engagement, things like citizen science, for example. And here we have various different recommendations on prioritizing and rewarding responsible science communication and also societal engagement activities within science. In the interest of time, I've just noticed I need to also cover the other chapter, so I'll just speed through some of these a little bit. And the final one here is to also revise research assessment processes to promote what we call inclusive excellence. and take full account of the variety of scientific activities and outputs that are required to support transformative change. I know that was when I was involved in the country review of Sweden back in 2012. I remember this was a big issue, that there were certain scientists that had a rather traditional view on how science should be measured, excellence, and there was new universities that were opening up in more provincial places and that were trying to do something else that was more applied, and yet the system, at least at that time, wasn't really set up for them to be able to demonstrate their worth, if you like, their contributions. And so again, lots of research and initiatives around this, and in fact, this is what I meant was the conference in December was about this. Was about research assessment processes, and so we have you know about DORA and QUARA and all of those things that are going on at the moment. But here again, we lay out some common principles which are derived from all these various different initiatives. So we haven't picked one and said this is the truth. So we've looked across all of them and then reduced it down to a few principles, if you like, here, common principles. And I think. I don't want to be too hopeful, but I mean I think things are moving slowly, but they're moving in the right direction. But again, going back to what I said a few minutes ago, there's lots of experiments, but lots of niche things happening, and the challenge still is scaling up a lot of these things. So quickly over to the last chapter, and I think I will try and be done in the next few minutes. This is the chapter on strategic intelligence. Strategic intelligence for agile policymaking. Strategic intelligence, I know, is a big topic in Sweden. Lots of discussion around that and experiments as well in trying to set up different institutional forms to both produce but also make better utilization of this evidence. I mean, one of the things that this book does argue for, and what the Transformative Agenda argues for as well, is more agile policy, particularly in times of a rapid change in the environment. So strategic intelligence is important in that context. So this is our definition of strategic intelligence. This slide is taken from my colleague Douglas Robinson. In fact, these slides are coming from him. So it's defined as a timely and usable knowledge that supports policymakers in understanding the relevant aspects and scope of the impacts of STI and their potential future developments. And it covers many different sorts of practices. So with things like technology assessment, foresight, horizon scanning, modeling, statistics, and evaluation, of course, as well, and various types of indicators. And if you want to know more about, in much more depth about strategic intelligence, there's a policy primer there that Douglas has written with a colleague at the OECD. And why is strategic intelligence important? Well, I've said a few words about that already, but I'm going to follow those up. So, of course, the pace of technology emergence is increasing, the demand for strategic intelligence. Technologies are more complex, they're developing at speed in situations of high uncertainty, also around potentially controversial technology fields as well, which also demand new different sorts of strategic intelligence. So the strategic importance of technology development and innovation is increasing. So it's driving this demand, as I said on the previous slide. I'm going to give you a couple of examples now from elsewhere in the book. One is around strategic competition in technology, basically chapter 2. So I've just got one slide on chapter 2 and one slide on chapter 6 as well. So chapter 2, I mentioned at the beginning, offers this framework for governments to both map their STI securitization policies, but also to normatively govern in a positive sense this system, these different policies. So we essentially, the system talks about protection, promotion, and projection policies, and then we introduce these sort of governance mechanisms, which are proportionality, partnerships, and precision. And this precision is really important. That is where strategic intelligence is a very dominant part of this chapter, because there are lots of these things going on, lots of uncertainties, many things are unclear as well, so it's very, very important to have in place systems that can monitor these different things, that are also anticipatory, that can try and anticipate what might occur in this rapidly changing environment. And in fact, we're doing some work at the moment. So Douglas is doing this with Carthage, the two authors that I'm citing here. A project for Finland that's funded by the European Commission, looking at how research and technology security considerations can be taken into account in Finnish STI policy. And one of the major objectives of this is around strategic intelligence. So here we're doing quite in-depth work, looking at what the strategic intelligence needs are for economic and research security, and also how the strategic intelligence ecosystem can also be adapted and the capacities can be developed to make that a more effective system. Then moving to chapter 6, again, strategic intelligence, really a very big part here. I mentioned this industrial ecosystems perspective, which I think is very promising for overcoming some of the shortcomings of sectoral and horizontal policies. I won't get into the details here, but because you're looking at a more complex system, that means you need to have more data. And so the argument of this chapter, and what this chapter in fact does, is it presents lots of different indicators that can be used to gauge what's going on in those ecosystems, and to see what direction they're moving in, and so on. So these are just some little diversions to illustrate the importance of strategic intelligence really across all of STI policy. So the key focus of chapter 7, though, is about these different practices. So it sets out the need for continuous horizon scanning, situational analysis, tech assessment, adaptive foresight, participatory methods, real-time evaluation, and monitoring. And the thing, I mean, I put all those up there. I'm not going to go through them, but what I want to get over here is that a strategic intelligence ecosystem actually uses a lot of different tools at different times in the policy cycle. And one of the challenges is to actually link all of that up as well. So this is why we often talk about strategic intelligence ecosystems. So there's a lot of different things being done by different people, using different models, coming often from different disciplinary traditions as well, where there can be a lot of misalignments, and that need to be navigated. Some of the key takeaways of this chapter: it's really important to link and tailor strategic intelligence to internal decision-making architectures. So there's a lot of great evidence produced, or knowledge produced, that never gets used. Understand also how different countries and institutions have set up their intelligence production and use capacities with a view to learning how others are doing it. And here, Douglas again has a big report coming out in a few weeks' time, looking at that. He's looking at horizon scanning practices across many different countries and also different sorts of institutions. We also need to draw lessons on the integration of strategic intelligence into the building and implementation of national technology strategies, research security policies, as I said in the previous slide, for ensuring strategic autonomy, but also for informing strategic alliances. So this is very much that securitization. And a very important point here, though, I have to say there's quite a bit of rubbish out there around strategic intelligence. So it's, I'm on LinkedIn, I see things appearing all of the time, which are really questionable. So quality control standards are really important, but there isn't much out there at the moment. So this is, again, an important focus of our future work in the OECD to better understand these best and bad practice in intelligence production, and of course in its use as well. So I'll stop there, and this is the link and the little QR code if you want to download the report. Happy, of course, to take any questions. Sorry, that was a bit of a whirlwind, I know. Mistimed things a little bit, had too many slides, but there's a lot of things in here. And for those who are interested, there will be another presentation of the Outlook, I understand, in a month's time by my boss, Jerry Sheehan, and he'll focus on chapter 2 of the Outlook primarily. So today we deliberately didn't cover that because of as we didn't want to repeat things. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, you were very efficient. So perhaps we could open up the floor for one question before we start with the panel discussions. Is there anyone who is? Anders, please use the microphone.
Hi, my name is Anders Salman. I coach Sweden's top scientists to reach out with the research. I was wondering, you talked about science being more risk-averse. And I was wondering what you compared that to. What are sort of the factors for deciding that? Or is there a certain era when we had the golden era of science?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not on top of all of this evidence, but there's several studies that have been done in the last 7 or 8 years that have shown that there is less. There seems to be less discovery in science. So people are looking at things like patent data, but also looking at publications. And so there's a lot of, I think it's called salami slicing and the like. So a lot of people. So there's more being produced, but very little of it seems to be towards breakthroughs. So there's work, particularly by various economists, that have looked at many different scientific fields as well, to see that perhaps the best years are behind us, in fact, in discovery. And of course, most of us don't want to accept that sort of message of despair. So we're looking at, well, perhaps the science system in particular probably does need to be reformed. You know, there are these problems around precarity, for example, that do drive incentives in certain directions. So if those can be fixed, perhaps there will be a new golden age, as you were saying, in science.
Well, that was a hopeful ending to that answer. Thank you very much, Michael. We're looking forward to be able to talk to you afterwards. You will be here. So with that, I would just like to invite a panel to have some reflections and comments on what we've heard. And I would like to welcome on stage Sara Massoud, who is the Executive Director at Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation. I would also like to invite Martin Nilsson-Jacobi, Vice Chancellor at Chalmers Institute of Technology, and Silvia Schwarzenegger, who is President at IVA, you've seen her before, and also Professor in Research Policy at Lund University. And then we will be joined online by Göran Marklund, who is the Deputy Director General at Vinnova. Warm welcome. So I would just like to start having listened into the presentation now, and also having, I know we have been able to look at least at some of the report as well. Just an open question to start. Where do you see the greatest needs for change based on the message that we have got from OECD in order to develop the Swedish innovation system? I would like to start with you, Sara.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for a great presentation. It's always good to be reminded of the importance of this area, and also to push us to really go through where we have the weak spots. So in preparation for this panel, I went back in time, and I looked through old material, and I found something that we wrote 10 years ago. And at that time, I was the head of research at Ericsson, but I was also the chair of the Swedish Council of Research Heads at Swedish companies. And we wrote something that we presented to the Swedish government that we call the Swedish Focus on R&D and Innovation. And there we identified 5 areas. And the interesting part that I found yesterday was that although we did this 10 years ago, many of them still hold, although they have to be modernized a bit. But the first one was to invest more in research, education, and also industrialization of new technology. The second one was to invest in full-scale test and demo facilities, open test beds, particularly important for innovation in small companies, because the big companies can afford to have their own test beds, but the small ones need to find a space where they can try out new technology. The third one was to stimulate cooperation between large and small companies, but also with academia and research institutes, and specifically also have incentives for mobility and career paths involving both academic career, but also in industry. And the fourth one was to invest in a common digital infrastructure for Sweden. And last but not least, number 5 was to make Sweden one of the most attractive companies in the world to place research, development, and early production in.
And those messages still hold?
Many of them, I think, still hold. Then I also want to just say that I don't think that we are beyond the best part in science. I think that we are definitely moving into a new golden age, and we will also use new tools, such as AI, in the use for science that will really bring us forward. But we have to make a change. We cannot completely continue on the path where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. Great way to start off this discussion. I think I turn now to Göran, since I will not forget you. But I know you've been heavily involved with the OECD work for a couple of years, and you're also working with innovation policy on a day-to-day basis at Vinnova. What do you have top of mind when you've heard the discussion?
Well, top of mind, I think this is a great product which comes every second year, I think, about. I think it's very important to read it through. And what the top of mind would be 4 things, but I draw one of them. 2025 was an interesting geopolitical year, I would say. Sort of a lot of elephants have been, disturbing the system quite a bit, and the elephants are not really mentioned, which is not surprising, of course, for an OECD publication. But the flip side of that goes to a country like Sweden, which is not an elephant in that room, and that is, unfortunately, Chapter 2, which you didn't go through very much. Reconfiguring scientific cooperation, which is not only scientific, I think. And you have that 6P figure that you showed. That is a very, very important message, I think. But doing that would require quite impressive and unprecedented sort of synergies between different actors and parts in the system, not at least the policy system, which I would say require institutional innovation. So we're far from that, I think, even though it looks neat and rather straightforward on that slide. So doing it is really much more challenging, I think. So that is the first one. I have a few more, but I can start with that one.
Thank you, Jan. That sounds good. You keep us hanging, so we'll wait for the other one. So, Martin, coming from a technology institute, what do you pick up from the presentation?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here discussing these matters that are sort of everywhere at the moment. I mean, and you said many really sort of points that I wanted to mention as well. So to some extent, I've already covered many of the things I thought about. But thinking of it from a Swedish perspective, to primarily, I mean, we are pretty good at innovation, so that part is actually a strength, I have to say. So what we need to focus on primarily, maybe is I think, coming from academia, the quality of the research, which is good, but maybe not quite as excellent as we would like. So we need to focus on that, and that needs focus. You can't do that and. You have to actually focus on that to actually achieve the goals and give long-term conditions and all of these things that are well known to actually promote academic excellence. One other thing is if you're good at innovation, you also need to sort of scale the innovations to make it possible for us to, in Sweden and Europe, etc., to actually scale up our companies and build large companies with great global impact. And this is a well-known problem in all of Europe, and also that also applies to Sweden, which is a small country, etc. But we need to have various ways to look at structural capital, etc., to concentrate resources so that we actually can keep our innovations here in our region, thinking about Europe. So that is a weakness that we need to work on, I think, to be competitive.
Thank you. And Sylvia, professor in research policy, what do you pick up?
Well, I mean, I think there's so many things that we could talk about. I mean, one thing, just starting at the end with strategic intelligence, I think that's a super interesting topic. And one of the things I would like to get into, you show all these different methods for strengthening your strategic intelligence. But as somebody who's worked both a lot in policymaking, but also in academia, I think one of the things we don't talk about enough is the absorptive capacity for strategic intelligence in the decision-making bodies. And I think this is a really interesting point, for example, in Sweden, which has a relatively small government administration, especially the ministries. So I think this absorptive capacity is something really interesting that one should talk about. I think this notion also about how science perhaps has sort of lost, or where the disruptiveness in science maybe has shown certain signs of weaning or waning. I think personally, as somebody who's published with one researcher, is one of the most cited in my field, I would have to agree, because I remember when I wrote a paper with that person, and I won't say who it is, but I remember we always had these discussions where they were saying, let's save that for the next 3 papers. Let's only put one idea in this paper. Let's not, and so I definitely think there is something there that we should think about. I also agree with you, so I think we're on the cusp, and not least with AI, where science might enter a whole new age. One of the things I want to reflect is that, as Göran was saying, I think we're entering a fundamentally different era, which is going to have far-reaching implications for science. I think in Sweden, we're a country that's been very fortunate that it really has tried to protect science from a lot of these sort of troubling external impulses. But we're entering sort of a new era, and I'm just wondering what that's going to do. And it could do some good things. Do you know what I mean? Like it might revitalize certain things. So we shouldn't only see it as something bad. And in that context, one of the things I think would have been interesting with Chapter 2 would be to talk about, on the one hand, the over-securitization of science and sort of science collaboration being reduced, but on the other hand, the importance still of global talent. That is not becoming less important, and that's actually becoming more important, and now there's actually some really interesting windows opening up. So I think that's something that one could also have talked about. I have a lot more things to say, but maybe one thing, if there's one thing I would recommend, there's this really interesting paper speaking of how scientific institutions might need to reform, and it talks about rediscovering the magnificence of science. It says we need a counter-reformation counter-reformation movement in science. I think you read it. I think it makes a lot of really interesting points, how we've been so keen to make science fit into our accountability systems and stable democracy systems that we've sort of killed its mojo, and that we need to kind of rediscover that. And I think that would be a really interesting conversation to have.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Sylvia. I would like to move on to a question, because Michael talked a lot about the importance of mobilizing the entire innovation system to achieve transformative change. I mean, really, i.e. combining different policy instruments and policy areas. This has been on the research policy agenda for a number of years, but with these changes that you have mentioned, is it still as important? And what are your reflections? Has the objectives changed for the transformative policy agenda? And do you have some reflection on how to move it forward? I think I start with Göran, because I know you've spent a lot of hours thinking about these issues.
Right, that was actually my second point. In chapter 5 and 6, you have an interesting, I think, combination of those. Yes, maybe the objectives may have changed for what the transformative agenda should be about, which is unfortunate. But it has never been more important, I think, to be able to have an ecosystem approach, which is mentioned a lot, and include or make synergies between STI policy, industrial policy, defense policy, other policy areas. It's more important than ever. just to save us in the first place, but also to address important things still, as climate change. And these chapters are very important. And this is not easy either, of course. It's not natural, not to most, not even to Sweden, to be able to cross policies between different ministries, for example, agencies and so on and so forth, in an efficient way. So absolutely, that's very important. Maybe some of the objectives may have been tweaked a little bit, but still, just to keep up with the technology race, you need that.
Thanks, Jan. And Saw, you mentioned a lot of different policy areas in your introduction. How do you look, as a research funder, mainly looking at one part of the research system, what are your reflections on this needs?
Well, what I think is, I was thinking about that when we talked about the salami slicing, we talked about maybe the golden age of science as past, and I don't think so, but I think we're making it more difficult for ourselves, and that has to do with the incentives that we give researchers. We have many very targeted calls, which then, of course, if the money is there, it means the research will go there because they need the funding. And at the same time, how we evaluate excellence is to a very large degree based on number of publications and citations. And that, of course, then drives the behavior of salami slicing. Let's save this great piece to the next publication instead of maybe writing the best paper that would be a big revolution of science. So I think we are, we tried to do a really good system to encourage quality, research quality, excellence, but in reality, it has not worked out in the perfect way. And I think we need to think about if we really want true science, if we want excellence, if we want basic science, if we want the breakthrough work, we have to find a way that that work is also rewarded and also given the opportunity to apply for those projects.
Yeah.
Long term. So from the foundation side, our role is to support basic science. That is the only thing we do. And we are a very strong believer in free, researcher-initiated, curiosity-driven research. And we have very long-term funding because we know that working with basic science, if you're really targeting the great breakthroughs, it will take time. And we need to allow the researchers a lot of freedom.
And Martin, now you're going to say that you don't like that, or, or music to your ears?
No, we certainly do like long-term conditions. I would not say the opposite. No, no, but I mean it's somewhat interesting. We're talking, it's schizophrenic in a way, right? We're talking about the need for big transformation. At the same time, we see a technology race that sort of during this seminar we might open our iPhones and see that a new version of some AI has been released. That is completely different level than we had yesterday. So we're living through transformations on almost a daily basis at this point. So yeah, okay, we need transformations, but maybe we need the right type of transformation and try to steer it in that way, because we don't lack progress in the technosphere. I mean, it's moving at the almost staggering. I mean, it's a staggering speed, right? About the golden age of science, yeah, to some extent, I see the point. Many of the breakthroughs are technology-driven, so I mean, in that sense, we are actually increasing our breakthroughs. I think also in science, but to a large extent driven by new technologies, and not only AI. There are also developments in nano and everywhere. So there's so many technology sort of breakthroughs that enables us and give us capacity to do breakthroughs. But of course, at the same time, maybe the deep reflection and the deep mental breakthroughs are maybe a little bit less. I agree with the fact that there are incentives in science to publish a lot rather than sort of deep. At the same time, one have to that system has not developed in a vacuum. It's because of you ask for transparency. You make and if I have published 3 times as many papers as you, I will argue that I should get the position and it for transparency reasons, etc. So you need to understand the mechanisms that are behind this type of behavior, and they are not always in consistence with having very large scale universities with very transparent rules, and you can sort of so all of this is driving us to a very instrumental way of evaluating excellence, and that sort of drives you again away from risk taking and towards safer. I could go on for a long time about this, but that's sort of have to be realistic and think about what is driving this. It's not evil. It's just sort of becoming. It comes out of the system for good reasons, or good intentions, but might have results that we are not desirable.
Really interesting way of highlighting the conflict of, the different objectives there. Sylvia, well, perhaps you have a comment on this issue, but also in terms of the need for transformative innovation policy. What do you see from EVA point of view?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I think we've also discussed at some of the OECD meetings is that, for a long time, science, technology, and innovation policy was sort of, in the easy times, it was sort of easy. It was like supposed to do produce good science, and innovation and growth and jobs. And now, all of a sudden, science and technology and innovation policy is supposed to help us secure, our borders or in our national defense, protect, save democracy because we have the fake news, help us with the green transition. So what I think is that we have this sort of demand overload on science, technology, and innovation policy. But science, technology, and innovation policy has also become a little bit of a bottleneck because it can never work. And I think that's what you were saying, Sarah, with your things. It can never work in isolation. And this is something I find really frustrating. And I think we have this problem because, as you pointed out, Michael, we need to address so many problems with increasingly limited resources. And I also think what was really interesting in the report is to show how much companies are starting to dominate R&D. And I don't think our toolkits are really adjusted to that yet. Do you understand? Because it fundamentally changes the dynamics. So we have to address all these demands, but we're not necessarily getting more resources for them. And then you're in this sort of bind, and I was one of the lead authors of the report, expert group report on the future of the framework program, and in a way, it's sort of you're stuck in the situation where you have to argue for more funds for science, because that's what we need. But at the same time, you also have to say that alone is not going to do it. Right? I mean, you need government that's actually going to procure state-of-the-art technology. You need governments that are willing to share risks in technology development. So I think we're in a really kind of difficult situation. And the final thing, which I found quite depressing, I was at an OECD meeting in June where different countries were presenting how are they investing in key technologies, And it was funny, you go around the room and every single country is investing in the same key technologies. Moreover, they're all like the size of Sweden or smaller. Do you see what I mean? And then that is supposed to be compared with China and the US. And that's what you're saying, Michael. Also, I think the scale thing that we're just not even, we haven't adjusted our toolkit to that. So I think we're in need of like massive therapy to figure out how we're going to square all these equations.
Yeah. Would you like to comment? I saw you nodding, Sarah. Would you like to comment on that, both your role now and also being at Ericsson previously?
No, I agree with you. It's very, very, very complex, and sometimes these incentives are working also against each other, which makes it very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I would just like to end, because time's running fast with such interesting discussion. I would just like to end with a question to Sarah and Martin. There is also some recommendations on the need for talent, career paths, and mobility. I know you spend a lot of thoughts on how Sweden will attract students and PhD doctoral students in the future. So could you mention your reflections on that, Sarah?
Sure, and I must say here I'm rather positive, or very positive, because we are actually making a very good job in Sweden, and Sweden is an attractive country. So I was looking through our numbers. We have, for instance, our young, super talented researchers or biträdande lektor, assistant professors in Sweden that we call the Wallenberg Academy Fellows. And today we have granted 288 grants. Around 40% of them are international recruitments, but 60% of them have an international PhD. The program has been running since 2012, so it's more than 10 years. And what is interesting is that even though 60% of them have a PhD degree from abroad, 90% stay in Sweden. And the 10% that have left Sweden, many of them are Swedes that have left for top positions in Stanford or other really top universities. So yes, we can attract talent, and yes, they stay in Sweden if we give them the right conditions. Also, we in our strategic programs, we have huge graduate schools, so if we add them up, it's more than 1,300 PhDs that we're educating for Sweden, and out of those, at least 350 should be industrial PhD students. The program that has been running for the longest period is the Wallenberg AI Autonomous Systems and Software program, with a goal to educate 600 PhDs. We will overshoot that, so we will most likely end on 700. Today we have 500 PhD students in the graduate school, and we have 250 that have already graduated. And we also checked, so what has happened with these 250? And it turns out the statistics is really good. Around 15% or 16% have left Sweden. Many of them are around 35%, they are still in the academic system or out on postdoc abroad, but 50% of the students that have been educated, they work in Swedish industry. And many of them are international students. So yes, we can attract talent. And as you said, Sylvia, talking about threat situations and so on, we should also realize that it's a tremendous source of talent for Sweden, that we are attractive for international talents. So I'm very positive in that sense. Yes, we can attract, and yes, many of them stay.
Yeah. Your reflections on that, Martin? Do you have the same picture?
Yeah, exactly the same, actually, and almost the same numbers. If I look at our recruitments, we're sort of 1,200 applicants for 15 positions, if you talk about the system professorships, and 90% stay. So we could actually repeat almost identical figures. And my feeling is that Sweden is a very attractive country if you sort of try to attract international talent and give them reasonable or good conditions. And both PhD level and young researchers are very attractive. Difficult to attract on top level sort of people very well established in, for example, the American system. That's to be realistic, that's harder. It's not impossible, but it's harder. But young people, very attractive, and therefore we have sort of a great opportunity to use that, and I think we are using it as well. So sometimes there's a gloomy picture around this, and I think it's not correct.
Great. We ended on a happy note. We started with the complex issues that had not moved as fast as we liked, and we had interesting reflection and great output in the end. So thank you very much for this panel discussion, and thank you much for contributing. So give them a round of applause. I will now switch to Swedish. Och det gör jag samtidigt som vi går över till vår panel med representanter från nästan alla riksdagspartier. Och även vi ska diskutera de här slutsatserna och se vilka reflektioner ni har kring hur de kan påverka framtidens forsknings- och innovationspolitik. Så därför tänkte jag välkomna online först Anders Ådahl, och sen vill jag välkomna upp Lili, som Anders representerar Centerpartiet, Lili André, riksdagsledamot för Kristdemokraterna, Maria Nilsson, statssekreterare vid Utbildningsdepartementet och också liberal. Och sen har vi Jesper Skalberg Karlsson, hej, som representerar Moderaterna i riksdagen. Fredrik Olofsson, riksdagsledamot för Socialdemokraterna, och Robert Stenqvist som är riksdagsledamot för Sverigedemokraterna. Varmt välkomna till IVA. Och jag tänkte även i det här passet får ni plats där nu, alltså ni har vatten och allting, så det är skönt, det ser bra ut som ni är på plats. Jag tänkte börja med också en liten öppen fråga till er, baserat på presentationen idag och det ni har sett i rapporten. Vad ser ni störst behov av förändring av forsknings- och innovationspolitiken för att Sverige fortsatt ska vara ett starkt innovationsland? Jag tänker börja med Anders på länk. Nu får du sätta scenen.
Ja, men tack så hjärtligt. Jag befinner mig i ett snölandskap en bit från Stockholm. Nej, men det jag tänker mest på är ju hur vi egentligen kan gifta samman forskningen med innovation, med företagande och implementering. Och vi har en ganska god bas i forskningen, men där tycker vi från Centerpartiet att vi skulle släppa den mer fri, både när det gäller hur vi finansierar och hur vi organiserar sektorn. Vi bedöms ofta väldigt högt på innovationssidan, men vårt stora problem, som någon i den tidigare panelen var inne på, är ju vårt företagande. Vi har väldigt många stora globala företag. Men alla de nya företag som växer underifrån möts ju av en attraktion utomlands ifrån. Så vi får inte behålla så många företag egentligen. Jag tror 70% försvinner utomlands när de börjar bli redo att bli väldigt intressanta. Där tror jag vi har en utmaning, och jag tror också vi har en utmaning i implementering. Vi har varit ganska bra på det tidigare, men att implementera ny kunskap både i näringslivet och i offentlig sektor kan jag känna lite oro för var vi befinner oss i relation till vad vi har gjort historiskt. Och så vill jag lägga till en sak till som jag själv tycker att Sverige saknar just nu. Vi har inte riktigt någon näringspolitisk vision eller riktning för Sverige. Vi har väl pratat väldigt mycket om grön omställning och industrins omställning, och nu kommer AI in, men i takt med att klimatpolitiken har blivit mer ifrågasatt och att vi är väldigt osäkra kring hur vi ska få in AI, både teknisk utveckling och implementering, så skulle jag nog säga att det svenska näringslivet är lite villrådigt, och även på innovationssidan saknar vi den spänsten vi skulle behöva både på grön omställningssida och AI-sidan.
Stort tack Anders, intressanta reflektioner. Då går vi vidare med Moderaterna.
Ja, jag ser om den här är igång.
Ja, vi får kolla. Jag hoppas att nu ska den få en tumme upp där, så nu är det bara att prata.
Toppen. Men först och främst väldigt roligt att få ta del av den här rapporten. Det är ju alltid viktigt för oss beslutsfattare att få ett utifrån perspektiv. Sen har vi inte alltid varit så bra på att plocka hem de slutsatser som OECD kommer med. Jag vet att i landrapporten så brukar det finnas 2 stora förslag. Det ena är återinför fastighetsskatten. Det säger ganska många av oss nej till. Och det andra förslaget är gör er av med hyresregleringen. Och det säger de andra nej till. Men när jag läser den här rapporten så tänker jag att ett genomgående tema verkar vara att Sverige ligger inte på latsidan. Sverige gör inte fel saker. Sverige gör rätt saker men för långsamt. Det tycker jag är ett huvudtema. Och jag tycker det passar ganska bra in i den beskrivning som mitt eget parti och flera andra också haft under de senaste åren. Det vill säga att vi lägger mycket pengar på forskning och utveckling, men vi behöver fundera på hur riggar vi systemet för att så mycket som möjligt ska bli verklighet och komma till marknad. Vi har ju mycket grundforskning, vi har många patent, men vi behöver se till att vi kommer igenom hela kedjan. Sen finns det ju intressanta förslag i rapporten som skulle kunna åstadkomma det, men de får vi återkomma till.
Ja, det behöver inte utlova något idag här på scen.
Nej, jag kan komma med långtgående löften, men vi ska hålla den här halvtimmen också.
Ja, precis. Då går vi vidare till andra sidan, eller på att säga, men Fredrik från Socialdemokraternas håll.
Tack så mycket. Jag hade möjlighet i höstas att vara på OECD en halvdag, få ta del av alla experters arbete på det här området. Otroligt värdefullt. Och det är klart att både rapporten och slutsatsen från det är ju att Sverige bygger ju på många år av ganska framgångsrik politik på det här området. Men att precis som sades tidigare fortfarande återstår att på riktigt få ut maximal output av det här ut i vårt näringsliv, och inte minst att se till så att vi får upp produktiviteten i hela samhället. Det är ju i väldigt stor utsträckning kopplat till de stora bolagen, och det här är ett problem som inte bara vi har utan många andra också. Jag tycker också att det idag ändå finns, med tanke på hur vi kom in i den här mandatperioden, där åtminstone det stora partiet i regeringsunderlaget tyckte att hela Vinnova borde läggas ner och man ska spara också på innovationssystemet inledningsvis. Visa att man inte fullt ut ändå har förstått betydelsen av detta. Det är inte riktigt det som Tidösamarbetet handlar om. Och jag tror också att vi behöver ett väldigt mycket tydligare fokus på vad Sverige ska leva på i framtiden. Hur den här sektorn eller de här verktygen kan användas för att lösa samhällsproblem. Vilka styrkor vi ska välja att bygga på. Vilka svagheter vi har att lösa för att de är strategiskt farliga för oss. Och där tycker jag inte att politiken är särskilt tydlig idag. Och jag hoppas att nästa mandatperiod kan ta stora steg på det området.
Ja, Lili, plocka upp den bollen här nu då.
Nu fungerar den. Nej, men stort tack för att jag också får vara här och få ta del av OECD-rapporten. Och jag läste ju igenom den i alla fall till största del innan jag kom hit. Men jag känner mig ganska stolt egentligen över där Sverige är. Och när vi tog övermakten så vill vi ha en strukturell reform helt enkelt. Vad behöver politiken göra? Jo, vi behöver sätta mål, riktningar och stabila spelregler. Och vi tycker också att det är viktigt med nationella överenskommelser. Och det satte vi igång med väldigt direkt. Vi la om forsknings- och innovationspolitiken. Vi också angående det här med Vinnova. Vi behövde också ta och reformera inriktningen där. För vi behöver det här ekosystemet. Vi behöver de här disciplinära tvärvetenskapliga områdena. Men som också den här styrkan i att jobba närmare industrin. Akademi, industri och ytterligare stärka våra test- och demoanläggningar där vi också har innovation. Så det handlar ju om det. Att när vi ställer om politiken, det är också att skapa förutsättningar för det som OECD-rapporten egentligen säger att vi behöver göra. Vi behöver stärka både samverkan och sen att akademi och forskning och utveckling i industri möts.
Tack. Och Maria, du har ju i din roll som statssekreterare verkligen varit i centrum för den här utvecklingen. Hur ser du, kanske någon reflektion om vad som är gjort men också vägen framåt?
Ja, det blir ju lätt så sista året in i mandatperioden att man tittar på det här och säger ja men det här har vi gjort, fattar inte de det? Och det ligger någonstans i sakens natur och jag kan väl hålla med att mycket av det som riktningen som rapporten visar, och tack så mycket för att jag får vara här, ska jag också säga, vi är på väg dit, men jag håller med om att vi skulle kunna göra mer. Det skulle kunna gå snabbare. Det skulle kunna på sina håll vara mer ändamålsenligt. Så det är klart att vi har fortsatt ett arbete att göra. Det behöver vi vara tydliga med. Vi blir inte klara om världen förändras. Vi behöver förändras i takt med den. Om jag ska lyfta något ur rapporten som jag ändå tycker är väldigt intressant och som jag tror vi behöver lägga ännu mer kraft kring, så är det just banbrytande forskning. Och hur kan vi säkerställa att rätt förutsättningar finns för just breakthrough science and technology. Vi har många embryon som visades och initiativ, men de skulle behövas skalas upp.
Tack. Robert, ditt parti har nämnts någon gång här tidigare. Vad är dina reflektioner kring vad Sverige kommer att behöva framöver? Är det något du tyckte var spännande i rapporten?
Ja, jag tycker mycket var spännande i rapporten. Sen håller inte jag med om precis allt. Men huvuddragen håller jag med om. Och jag sitter i utbildningsutskottet och det är ju så att säga mitt ansvar. Och jag tror att vi kan vässa vårt utbildningssystem just i den här riktningen som rapporten pekar på. Jag tror att vi behöver göra det framöver. Och sen den här riktningen, vi måste fundera på, det är ju så att säga, det verkar självklart vilken riktning vi ska gå i, men det kanske inte är självklart. Alltså, vi behöver diskutera, vart ska vi gå? Det är som att utvecklingen driver sig själv och vi på något sätt bara följer med. Och sen det här, jag vill bara kommentera det här med tydlighet lite grann. Jag kom in i riksdagen 2011 och den här forskningsproppen som regeringen kom med, det var den överlägset tydligaste forskningsproppen som jag har sett i alla fall. Det är ingen annan som kommer i närheten faktiskt. Och sen var det en sak till jag funderade på när jag läste en sammanfattning av den här rapporten. De andra duktiga här har läst hela rapporten kanske, men jag läste sammanfattning. Och det är ju att alltså vi måste ju fundera på ansvarsområden. Vad är politikens ansvar? Vad är högskolornas ansvar? Vad är forskningens ansvar i högskolorna? Och vad är företagarvärldens ansvar? Jag tror att man måste reflektera lite över det, för jag såg inte något sånt i rapporten, i sammanfattningen av rapporten. Och jag tror att man får inte överlappa varandras ansvarsområden för mycket. Och sen är ju mitt ansvar som politiker att se efter skattebetalarnas pengar, att de inte hamnar i svarta hål. Och det har ju hänt när vilda idéer har fått fäste så att säga. Och jag tycker att vi bör vara lite försiktiga i framtiden och tänka efter innan vi satsar för stora skattemedel på vilda framtidsprojekt. Tack.
Intressant, tack så mycket och tack för den här första rundan. Jag tänker att nu får ni också, när vi fyller i varandra så bara vifta lite nu. Vi tänker vi ska ha ett livligt samtal här. Så. Men jag tänkte en fråga som lyfte, som låg liksom lite som en bakgrund i både i rapporten och i presentationerna innan, det är ju det förändrade geopolitiska läget, och det här med internationellt samarbete har ju liksom varit, ja, vi som har jobbat länge i den här världen, det var bara kör. Det är inte riktigt där vi är nu i den världen. Hur ser ni kring det? Internationella samarbeten kopplat till forsknings- och innovationspolitiken. Några länder som är särskilt viktiga, några reformer vi behöver göra. Jag tänker vi börjar med dig, Anders, om du har några reflektioner kring det.
Ja, men tack så mycket. Men jag tänker att man behöver vända den här lite dystra bilden av geopolitikens utveckling med intressesfärer i väst och intressesfärer i Ryssland och Kina till svenska möjligheter. Europa har precis slutit avtal, eller på väg att sluta avtal med sydamerikanska länder, och vi har slutit avtal med Indien. Det är otroligt spännande nationer för oss att rikta ett nytt sökljus mot. Så jag tänker nog att inställningen åtminstone på forskningsnivå ska vara väldigt, väldigt öppen, och att det snarare bjuds nya möjligheter när handelspolitiken kan öppna upp för nya möjligheter. Så generellt sett så finns det ingen anledning egentligen att känna att vi behöver bromsa in utan snarare öppna upp för nya möjligheter, min tanke här.
Intressant, Anders. Vi går vidare. Fredrik. Nej, förlåt. Jesper.
Ja, men först och främst, vill man forska i Sverige, är man liksom ledare inom sitt fält. Vi är öppna. Man är varmt välkommen att komma hit och liksom bygga sig själv en bättre framtid, men också bidra till att bygga Sverige starkare. Tiden för att få uppehållstillstånd för utländska doktorander har ju kraftigt minskat. Det är bra. Sen om man tar det i den lite större kontexten. Jag kan gissa att det finns många i, säg till exempel de Förenta Staterna, som kanske känner av en minskad akademisk frihet, som känner av en allt för låg levnadsstandard, som vill söka sig till en plats där nya idéer uppmuntras och blir verklighet. Och är Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Johns Hopkins intresserade av att ha filialer i Sverige. We're open for business.
Känner vi igen?
Jag kan nog hålla med om det mesta där som Jesper tog upp. Men jag skulle också kunna lägga till att i det större perspektivet så är det förstås, ja, det är väl två saker. Det ena är förstås de som är i någon mening våra vänner, eller som kan vara det, är naturligtvis särskilt viktigt att samarbeta med. Det är inte bara Europeiska unionen, det finns ju fler länder, det nämndes några tidigare. Men också att vi under ju väldigt lång tid, nu slår vi pendeln, under lång tid har vi gett bort både teknikledarskap och våra bolag har varit i Kina och lärt upp dem på ett väldigt bra sätt, och nu ligger vi efter på flera områden. Vi kan inte bara säga att det här är så farligt så att vi kan inte ha någon form av beröringsskräck här, utan vi måste också våga vara på ett kontrollerat och klokt och bra sätt öppna för olika former av tekniköverföring i de sektorerna till Europa och Sverige. Om vi inte får till det, ja, då kommer vi under många år sannolikt att vara beroende istället av att importera färdiga lösningar, och det är inte en bättre väg framåt. Det här är ju fortfarande lite kontroversiellt, och jag tror att vi behöver se över flera delar i den lagstiftning som nu har om investeringar också, för att vi ska se till att vi blir vinnare här. Inte på ett naivt sätt tro att någon ger bort något åt oss, men det finns ett utrymme här som vi inte får slarva iväg, för då riskerar vi bara att komma sämre ut i förlängningen.
Nej, men det är ju som sagt viktigt jättebra att vi har de här avtalen med de här länderna där det är också en stark forskningsnation, och att vi välkomnar dem hit. Och det här menar att regeringen gör ju sitt också när man kommer hit som forskare, att man får en snabb integration, att man får sitt personnummer och att man får sitt arbetstillstånd och så vidare. Men här behöver vi också lära oss att göra sitt, så man känner sig trygg i sin anställning. omställning och om vi ska få fler postdocs och så vidare, att man också har den här långsiktigheten i en karriär här i Sverige, så vi också får behålla dem sen. Så där tror jag att vi behöver stärka både den politiska viljan och sen så det man kan göra inom akademin.
Ja, Maria, ligger det några fler reformer där eller är det klart nu med?
Nej, jag tror inte att det är klart. Jag ska säga så här att vi har ju jobbat väldigt mycket med ansvarsfull internationalisering under den här regeringen. Och det finns ju ansvarsfull internationalisering består av två begrepp. Internationalisering, ja, för att utan internationalisering klarar vi inte excellens som är vårt övergripande mål, att få mer excellent forskning till Sverige. Det är så vi blir mer konkurrenskraftiga. Då behöver vi internationalisering på alla sätt och alla plan. Sen behöver vi, givet det geopolitiska läget, vara ansvarsfulla i den internationaliseringen. Och där kommer jag av att vi ser att pendeln har svängt. Vi behöver säkerställa att den inte svänger i det andra hållet, det vill säga att vi blir ett stängt land. För det ska vi absolut inte vara. Men vi behöver just hitta rätt sätt att vara ansvarsfulla i vår internationalisering. Och det har vi jobbat en hel del med för att ge redskap, förutsättningar för forskningsfinansiärer och för lärosäten. Sen har vi jobbat mycket med att också stärka internationaliseringsdelen. Det har ju nämnts tidigare. Jag ska också nämna att vi hade ett stort program i forsknings- och innovationspropositionen som handlar om strategisk rekrytering. Där vi i mångt och mycket kopierar KVAs eminenta arbete, som också handlar om att få hit de biträdande lektoraten, både de som finns i Sverige men som finns internationellt.
Ja, men tack Maria. Och Robert, din reflektion kring det här internationellt samarbete?
Ja, alltså geopolitiskt blev ju relationerna med USA mer komplicerade efter att presidenten där började nämna konstiga saker om Grönland, skulle jag säga. Alltså det är ju ingen liten grej. Alltså jag tror det påverkar och det kommer påverka i framtiden. Sen är min reflektion att i samband med det här så funderar man ju mycket liksom geopolitiskt i hela världen, och jag tror ju att Europa måste få mer självförtroende. Vi är ju med i EU och det är ju samarbete, alltså det är ju en samarbetsorganisation. Vi gör ju ingenting annat än samarbeta där. Och jag tror att helt enkelt att vi måste snäppa upp i Europa, få mer självförtroende. Till och med Sverige måste få mer självförtroende. Det handlar om den här självbilden också. Vi är så små och USA är så jättestort. Ja, så är det ju faktiskt. Men vi får inte göra oss hur små som helst och Europa får inte göra sig hur litet som helst. Och då tror jag att vi blir attraktivare också att locka forskare från andra delar av världen. Jag tror inte vi ska göra oss till för mycket utan lite back to basic faktiskt.
Ja, men intressant. Vi har lite följa upp där, för ni nämnde ju reformer som regeringen har gjort kring det här med att locka till sig utländska doktorander och även studenter. Och den nämndes ju i den förra panelen också. Jag tänker, kanske Fredrik, är det någonting du ser, hade det sett annorlunda ut med om ni hade suttit i regeringen? Eller har ni reformer i pipeline här som ni skulle vilja införa?
Nej, jag tycker flera av de sakerna som regeringen har gjort på det området har varit bra. Och det skapas ju också nu nya möjligheter också kopplat till hur världsläget ser ut och hur inte minst den amerikanska presidenten beter sig. Så det är klart att ta vara på de möjligheterna har ju varit väldigt viktigt, något som vi också har lyft fram. Sen klart att på alla områden så handlar det om att vara ett attraktivt land, attraktiva städer. Det handlar om trygghet, säkerhet, det handlar om välfärdssamhället, det handlar om att vara intressanta, både med kultur och musik och restauranger. Alltså, rubbet blir ju viktigt när man ska vara attraktiv. Liksom. Men förstås också bilden kring Sverige och hur vi kan jobba med den gemensamt utåt. Så alltihopa det samlat kommer att vara otroligt viktigt, och det kan vi väl göra mer på de flesta av de här områdena. Men jag tycker också att, får hålla med här när Sverigedemokraterna säger någonting bra, att vi ska både ha självförtroende och också lyssna på dem som nu jobbar med det här och som pekar på väldigt goda resultat. Att vi har en bra grund att stå på helt enkelt. Sen tror jag fortfarande att vi behöver mer av liksom politiskt ledarskap för att peka ut var vi ska ta vägen framåt. Där återstår en hel del att göra dessvärre. Och det blir liksom en uppgift nu framöver att orientera oss i den nya världen, förstå att väldigt mycket av det vi har varit vana vid inte kommer tillbaka och att våga oss göra av med en del som då har varit självklart och för att hitta det som är nya framåt.
Men jag tänkte kanske plocka upp, för det är möjligtvis här man ser en skillnad mellan några av er i alla fall, det här med viljan att peka ut. Anders, du var lite inne på det här med en tydligare näringspolitik och så. Vill du lägga till något där, eller är det någon som vill kommentera det? För det känns som här finns något där med lite olika syn.
Ja, men jag kan väl först säga att jag ser det som en riskfaktor för Sverige att vi inte har pekat ut en tydlig riktning vart vi ska. Nu har den här regeringen gick till val förra gången på att, så att säga, få ordning på Sverige. Men det är ju en relativt defensiv ambition. Det handlar inte om att utveckla Sverige, och där tror jag faktiskt att vi i de olika politiska partierna skulle behöva tydligare komma samman, kanske rent av för att formulera var ska Sverige befinna sig om en 15-20 år, så att det blir stabilare spelregler för akademin och för näringslivet. Inte minst har vi haft energisektorn som lider väldigt, väldigt svårt av att det inte finns en överenskommelse mellan politiska partier, och jag tror även att näringslivet och akademin i stort lider av att det inte finns en tydlig riktning, ett tydligt mål. Så det saknar jag verkligen.
Lili, du hade någon kommentar där.
Men jag kan inte hålla med om att vi inte har något mål och strategier såklart, utan vi hade ju en direkt inriktning. Det är ju mot excellens och strategiska styrkeområden. Det är inom energipolitiken, det är inom AI, inom försvar och inom cyber och så vidare. Så där har vi ju varit väldigt tydliga. Det är snarare så att på något sätt att akademin, speciellt lärosätena, tycker att vi har varit alldeles för specifika och för målinriktade. Och, så vi vill ju gräva där vi står, och eftersom Sverige ändå har en fantastisk kompetens och forskning och duktiga lärosäten som jobbar inom det här områdena där vi också har pekat ut excellens, så är ju det väldigt bra. Så att, sen är vi också väldigt engagerade i att försöka få till hela den här samverkan och lärosätena emellan, så att vi blir mer internationella i Sverige också, för där behöver vi steppa upp oss lite hos lärosätena, att vi också blir mer internationella för att stärka oss i Europa. Nej, men vi har väldigt bra tycker jag, mål och de här nationella strategierna, det jobbar vi på. Och sen så när vi kommer ur när vi har kommit ur den här lågkonjunkturen också, så kan vi också se kanske än mer av det kapital och forskning och utvecklings investeringarna som vi också behöver för att stärka samverkan och också mellan akademi och industri.
Men då har Anders så ordentligt räckt upp handen, så då måste du få prata nu, Anders.
Ja, jag är en sån där ordentlig person som inte bara bryter in och ropar att sossar är dumma i huvudet. Nej, men bara som respons där på Lilis kommentar. Alltså, nej, men det jag menar är att vi har ingen liksom näringslivspolitisk stor vision eller ambition. Vi har väldigt stor tveksamhet i klimatpolitiken. Vi vet inte vad vi ska göra med AI som väller in. Däremot så har regeringen absolut varit väldigt, väldigt tydliga med prioriteringar och fokus för akademin, och där menar vi faktiskt i Centerpartiet att det kanske inte var rätt område att vara supertydlig och vilja politiskt direkt styra, utan där vill vi ju släppa friheten mycket mer lös och ha en större andel basfinansiering, större möjligheter för lärosätena att bedriva strategiska prioriteringar jämte att vi vill ha lärosäten som har olika organisationsform och som kan spänna bågen på det sätt som man själv finner bäst. Så bara en lite förtydligande till Lilis kommentar där.
Så ingen som vill hoppa in? Varsågod, Jesper.
Nej, men kort bara kring att få ordning på Sverige. Det pratas ju ibland om att liksom demokratin i västvärlden är hotad och på tillbakagång. Och det kan absolut vara sant i vissa länder. Faktum är att det är sant i Sverige också. När Freedom House till exempel rankar vår demokrati, alltså demokratin här i Sverige, då har vi faktiskt tappat från maximala 100 poäng till 99 poäng. Och vad är då den här sista poängen som gör att vi inte har en fulländad demokrati? Systemhotande brottslighet. Så att när vi pratar om att få ordning på Sverige, ja, då är det just den punkten. Alltså det spelar roll för Sverigebilden, både internationella mätningar och för alla oss som bor här, om det skjuts människor av misstag på gatorna. Och det är vi på väg att rensa upp.
Ja, men perfekt, men då tänker jag ta en fråga till här. En av utgångspunkterna var ju att få ihop olika politikområden. Det är ju liksom det hörde vi från Michael här, och att det var viktigt. Jag tänker ett sånt område där olika politikområden möts gäller ju det här med den långsiktiga kompetensförsörjningen, och framförallt den här frågan om livslångt lärande i ljuset av de snabba förändringar som är teknologiskt och förändrade förutsättningar för näringslivet. Har ni några idéer om reformer där som skulle kunna stimulera det här? Och då ger jag ord till Maria. Du sitter ändå på utbildningsdepartementet. Känns rimligt att börja där.
Ja, men nu blir jag ju den här jobbiga människan som säger att ja, men titta här, vi har 3 reformer. Så här, vi behöver en större flexibilitet i utbildningssektorn och utbildningsinfrastrukturen för att kunna tillgodose näringslivets behov av korta kurser på distans ibland, även om vi är inte en vän av distanskurser i vanliga fall, så här finns det absolut en poäng i detta. En större flexibilitet. Vi har dels tillsatt en utredning, den kallas Stephen Wang-utredaren, utredningen efter utredaren, och som har lämnat ett förslag på hur man kan bygga en sån struktur så att man faktiskt stimulerar de här korta kurserna som ligger nära näringslivet, inte minst behov. Och nu, vi jobbar frenetiskt för att komma vidare med det. Vi har också finansierat den typen av korta kurser till vissa lärosäten. Ett sitter här idag. För just det här där man ligger nära näringslivet. Så jag tror att ska man prata om livslångt lärande så behöver man också prata om, vi behöver en struktur för det, och vi behöver också viss finansiering för det. Och det jobbar vi på nu.
Någon som vill kommentera det? Ni alla i tiden nickar. Men Fredrik kanske?
Nej, men det som har gjorts på senaste tiden på det här området är ju ändå omställningsstudiestödet och de möjligheter som kan skapas i förhållande till det. Och då krävs ju en del av det som Maria säger som behöver implementeras mer och fortare. För det är klart att det är en satsning som når väldigt brett. Det gör det möjligt för dem som vill och att få kurser och så att fungera med det systemet kommer att vara väldigt centralt framåt. Och jag tycker det går lite långsamt på det området. Sen klart att väldigt många av de andra insatserna som finns, allt från arbetsmarknadsutbildning, hur gymnasieskolan ser ut och allt annat, behöver också där se till så att man kommer snabbare till de bristyrken som vi ju ser många exempel på. Och det är klart, där finns ju också en frågeställning mellan å ena sidan vad människor kanske drömmer om och å andra sidan vad som behövs inom de närmsta åren. Och där måste vi också politiskt våga berätta om det och styra resurser så att vi får det här att hända, därför att vi kan inte acceptera att vi både har så stor kompetensbrist och så väldigt hög arbetslöshet.
Tack. Jesper har en kommentar också.
Ja, men som Maria var inne på tidigare så erbjuder digitaliseringen stora möjligheter. Här har vi ju sett en förskjutning, allt ifrån universiteten till folkbildningen, att erbjuda de här mer av korta kurser på distans, öppnar upp för fler. Det tycker jag är utmärkt. Tittar man sen också på hur vi liksom riggar strukturer, tycker jag att rapporten också nämner att vi behöver bli lite mer flexibla kring doktorandtjänster. Kanske titta mer på detta med industridoktorander så att det inte är 8-5 utan att också människor i arbetslivet kan komma in på de tjänsterna. Norge och Danmark har gjort intressanta saker på de områdena. Och sen slutligen, det är klart att pengar spelar roll. Vi tog ju beslut på vår stämma i höstas, alltså Moderaterna, en hel del förslag kring nästa mandatperiod då, som handlar om skatteavdrag för företag som investerar i kompetensutveckling, men också titta mer på detta med skatteavdrag för individers utbildningskostnader så att man kan underlätta då omställning och karriärväxling. För det ska man nog ha med sig. Är man inte beredd att lära sig nya saker i arbetslivet, då kommer man ha väldigt tufft på framtidens arbetsmarknad. För att inte säga att man redan har det tufft idag.
Tack. Och Anders?
Ja, men kort tillägg bara. Jag tycker regeringen gör ett gott arbete och jag kan instämma i Fredriks kommentarer också. Men en sak vi ska se upp med är att de långa programmen vid våra tekniska högskolor och våra universitet, att inte önska för hårt att näringslivet och samhället ska definiera vad man behöver direkt därifrån, utan det är snarare tvärtom, att det är generiska kunskaper som kan möta en föränderlig värld som de studenterna behöver, och då behöver de långa programmen vara mer öppna än slutna snarare.
Ja, men tack Anders. Nu hade jag tänkt ställa en fråga om AI, men jag tänker vi har 3 minuter kvar så jag tänker vi bör inte gå in på den. Då tänkte jag göra så här, helt förberedd fråga till er nu tyvärr, men det är snart valrörelse så jag tänker att ni kan ta den här. Men om det är någonting, forsknings- och innovationsfrågor brukar inte vara det som man vinner val på, kanske det som diskuteras mest. Men om det hade varit en fråga som ni hade önskat vara med i valrörelsen som har forsknings- eller innovationskoppling, vilken skulle det vara? Och nu får ni tänka en liten stund och den som kommer först får räcka upp först. Robert, varsågod.
Ja, den är på.
Den är på.
Ja, med forskning om kärnkraft och försvar skulle kanske slå lite grann bland väljarkåren. Tack.
Tack. Kort och koncist. Maria?
2 saker. Hur vi kan få en ökad kvalitet genom hela utbildningssystemet. Från förskolan, via ungdomsskolan, högre utbildning och ett fortsatt och ännu tydligare excellensfokus inom forskningen. Och sen att vi också satsar på att Sverige ska nå 4% av BNP i utgifter, både kombinerat de offentliga och de privata.
Offensivt mål. Spännande. Tack Lilly.
Ja, jag skulle kunna kopiera Maria där. Det var jättebra. Men vad ska jag säga? Jag tänkte på det här lite grann när förra panelen pratade om det här med breakthrough forskning. Alltså, politisk fråga är det ju inte egentligen. Det är det ju inte. Men jag tänker att jag kan hålla mig till politiskt så. Men jag tycker den är spännande. Tänk att få liksom, svenska forskarteamet mer breakthrough kring publikationer, det kan jag säga.
Tack, spännande. Och Fredrik?
Om man kommer från näringsutskottets sida så skulle jag säga att mycket snabbare komma från idéer och genombrott och upptäckter till marknad och fler jobb. Det tar alldeles för lång tid och går det för lång tid, ja, då vinner Kina varje gång.
Tack. Jesper?
Nej, men Sverige ska vara rikast i EU och vägen dit går delvis genom forskning och innovation. Jag och Fredrik stod värda för ett seminarium om precis vad som skulle kunna släppa lös tillväxten i Sverige förra veckan. Hur stor andel handlade om forskning och innovation? Mer än hälften, större än alla de andra tillsammans.
Tack, och sist men inte minst Anders på länk.
Ja, nej, men absolut forskning och innovation skulle jag önska kom högre upp på agendan. Men om jag får välja en enda sak så är det hur kan vi få de nya och superspännande små företagen som ligger i spetsen. Hur kan vi få dem att stanna kvar i Sverige och växa i Sverige och bli framtidens exportsuccéer. Det önskar jag att vi fick upp på agendan. Jag önskar också att näringslivets representanter hjälpte till och lyfte de här frågorna.
Stort tack, och stort tack till alla för att delta i en jätteintressant diskussion. Tack så mycket. And then I switch to English. I'm very knowledgeable in different languages. So as this seminar comes to a close, I would just like to especially thank Michael for leaving beautiful Paris and join us here in wintry Stockholm to give the presentation. It was very interesting. And thank you everyone who joined online, and also thanks to all the panelists and the EVA staff for preparing this seminar. The discussion will now continue upstairs, where we have some refreshments. So thank you very much.